Today, our main topics, we're going to talk about an admiral in the Navy. So, we haven't talked a lot about the Navy yet, except for the ironclads. So, we have to see how the Anaconda plan is actually working. And then we're going to talk about a naval hero who's an unlikely naval hero. So, I'll give you a little bit of background on David Farragut, where he comes from, what his upbringing is, how he gets involved in the Civil War, and what the outcome is of the battle that he's involved with. So we're going to take a look at an American hero here. And then we'll take a look at the bloodiest battle in American history, which is the Battle of Antietam, or the bloodiest single day of fighting in American history, the Battle of Antietam. And more specifically, how does the Battle of Antietam get started? So while we're going over this stuff, just remember your study guide is due. For you purple people, your test will finish on Tuesday. Your test, we'll review a little bit on Tuesday. Your test will be Tuesday. In fact, we might throw the review part back until Thursday. But the first part of the test is the essay portion of the test. There are 3 questions that you'll need to answer. In fact, for you guys, because you might have some downtime today, there's a really good chance I might go ahead during WIN and drop that into Otis. For you, the earliest that I might make it due is Wednesday, which I know you don't have my class on Wednesday, but I might make it due Wednesday. There are 3 short answer questions. I think the biggest of the 3 requires a paragraph. So that's worth 15 points. And then the test, which is usually the easier part, will be next time you have class, which would be Thursday. And that would be probably the best time for us to do reviews. So you can check Otis during WIN. I'm going to tell you there's a really good chance I'll drop that portion of the test into Otis. You can get started on it. You can work on it. You'll have the knowledge you need to work on it. So put the effort into it. And once you hit submit, unless you screw up, I'm going to grade it. If you accidentally hit submit and forgot to answer a question, then make sure you message me and ask. Say, Purple 1, would you please unsubmit my thing? I forgot to answer the last question or something like that. So that's the plan. So next week's a short week. We don't have school on Friday. So before we're gone for the short week, we will be done with chapter 16, wrapped up, ready to move on to chapter 17, which is the rest of the Civil War and the end of the Civil War. April and May go really fast, so that's why we can't take days like today where there's only 10 students in this class off, because time just goes way too fast. So we'll flip back to this. This is the last slide we looked at, so this answers Victor's question from the study guide, and it isn't a great detail of information, but William Tecumseh Sherman, Grant's right-hand man, who believed that we should have been cured of war by seeing what had to be seen at the Battle of Shiloh. So that's where we stopped. Does anybody remember what was the complaint about Grant following the Battle of Shiloh? He might have been drunk and missed the first part of the battle. What was Lincoln's response to that complaint? This guy fights. So willing to overlook major issues with the guy. If the guy is potentially an alcoholic and derelict of duty on the battlefield, and possibly because of his drunkenness, his leadership being absent, could have cost the lives of American men. Lincoln is willing to overlook that because he finally has someone that'll dig in and win. And we're not seeing that on the Eastern Front. So the 2 fronts, East, where George McClellan's trying to capture Richmond, and in the West, where Grant is trying to capture the Mississippi River. So this slide probably popped up right at the end. This is a man named David Farragut. First of all, looking at the picture of David Farragut, what might stand out to you about him? You may or may not get what I want you to say here, but I'm going to try anyway. His what? He doesn't have a bunch of medals and stuff. That's probably true. Okay, this probably isn't maybe a fair question because it doesn't stand out as a big thing. Because you would assume that David Farragut is a leader, and we expect our leaders to be older. Did it strike anybody that Captain Farragut here seems to be kind of old? He is. Yes, Shelby. Yeah, it does, doesn't it? I never really noticed that. Anyway, this is David Farragut. Now, I like to go into a little bit of background on these guys because sometimes their background is more interesting than the story itself. And gosh darn it, I'm missing a paper. The background on David Farragut is really kind of interesting because it's unusual. It's unique. So I give you a little bit of biography, even though it doesn't have anything to do with the Civil War. It kind of tells us why he is the way he is. The guy is tough. The guy is really good. But it also kind of helps you think that you don't have to come from a normal raising, a normal background to do great things. So, you could be orphaned at the age of 9. David Farragut was. In fact, he wasn't, his original name wasn't David Farragut. He was James Farragut. That's the name that his mama gave him. His mama died of yellow fever when he was an infant. So he was left to be raised by his father. The problem was his father, his name was Jorge. David is born in 1801, by the way. James Farragut is born in 1801. Dad's name is Jorge. He's a Spanish merchant captain. Merchant captain means he's the captain of a ship that hauls stuff, maybe bars of soap or Gatorade or whatever, back and forth between America and Spain. That's why his name's Jorge. You can't really see Spanish in this guy necessarily, but he is of Spanish descent. Because his father was never around and because his mother passed away, James Farragut is left to be raised by a captain in the Navy named David Porter. So when he's a little tiny boy, he's an orphan basically. He has a father, but his father can't be around. So David Porter sort of unofficially adopts James Farragut. Now James falls in love with his new father. Not necessarily like, oh my gosh, I'm in love, but the love that children have for their parents, that kind of love. He has a great deal of respect for David Porter, thinks David is a great guy, changes his name to James, from James to David to honor his new father. So James Farragut becomes David Farragut because he really appreciates what his new dad has done for him. Well, Dad's in the Navy. So there isn't a whole lot for David Farragut to do. So at the age of 9 years old, what grade does that put you in 9? You guys are 13 and 14, so third or fourth grade? 9 years old, he enters the Navy. What does a 9-year-old do in the Navy? Swab the deck, clean, whatever. So, because that's where his dad is. So it's kind of one of those situations where David Farragut gets what he gets in life because of the connections that he's got in life. It very well could be that someday, and this has happened a couple of times before, maybe you want to be a social studies teacher. So you go to college and you do your student teaching, and you're applying for a job, and you're applying for a job in Bennington. I have friends in Bennington. If you're applying for a job in Bennington, it's not always about what you know. Oftentimes it's about who you know. So you might contact all of the people that have been part of your social studies education and be like, hey, I'm applying for a job. You got any pointers for me? Could you help me? I got my job because I knew a lady that got me an interview. And then my interview was good, so it got me the job. But David Farragut is in the Navy because he's 9 and his dad is a captain, his adopted dad. But here's the cool thing. At the age of 12, in 1812, the War of 1812, David Farragut is an officer in the Navy, placed in charge of prize ships. So when his dad, David Porter, goes out and captures a ship, War of 1812 is versus the British, when David Porter captures a British warship, James, David Farragut, is put in charge of it. So could you imagine being a sailor and you're taking orders from a 12-year-old? That'd be kind of hard, wouldn't it? Could you imagine being you, 13 and 14, and taking orders from a 6th grader? Kind of hard. Because do you have a tremendous deal of respect for a 6th grader, knowing that their experiences in life aren't really much greater than yours, if at all? But that also tells us that David Farragut must have, even at the age of 12, commanded respect of his men. or at least his father demanded that he command respect from his men. So that's kind of interesting. At 12 years old, the guy is a big deal in the Navy. By the outbreak of the Civil War, David Farragut is retired. He's old. He's sitting at home in his rocking chair, living in Virginia. And the war breaks out, and he's like, well, I might as well join up. So he goes to Washington, knocks on the door of the Department of the Navy, and says, what do you need me for? He was an officer in the Navy when he retired, so he figures he's useful for something. Sort of like they went and got Ulysses Grant out of retirement in Illinois. What's the problem with getting David Farragut out of retirement? Where's he live? I just told you. He's from Virginia, so who cares? Why is that an issue for us or for the Union? Is Virginia a Union or Confederate? It's Confederate. So why are they leery of allowing David Farragut into the United States Navy? They're fearful where his loyalties lie. Shelby says they don't want to be betrayed by him. That is exactly 100% it. So they're like, go away, old man. We don't need you. And he's like, come on, I really know my stuff. And I'm USA all the way. But you live in Virginia. So basically, they told him to kick rocks and go away. But fortunately for David Farragut, his stepbrother, his foster brother, his name was David Porter also, is in the United States Navy. And he says, hey, my bro is the best that there is. My older bro. You got to let him in. So the Navy reluctantly gives David Farragut a commission in the United States Navy. They need good sailors just like they needed good generals. They let him in, and almost immediately the guy starts to take over. They give him a 25-gun flagship. That's not a huge ship. It's 32 and 36 gun ships were the big dogs. So 25-gun flagship, and flagship means that's in charge of other ships, and 17 other ships. So they give him command right away because his brother vouched for him. It's sort of like tailors trying out for cheerleading. So when you try out for cheer or dance, you have to have teachers vouch for the kind of character that you are. So every one of her teachers had to fill out a form that said Taylor's nice, she's not evil, and she does what I ask her to do. So you count on other people to give you recommendations. His brother gets him in, and they give him 17 ships, and they're like, okay, here's your job. Go capture New Orleans. Remember, 3 things that the Union needed to do to win this war. One was the Anaconda, blockade the coast. One was capture Richmond. The other was capture the Mississippi. We're working on the Mississippi with Grant. Richmond is kind of bogged down because McClellan is a hesitator. So let's go capture the mouth of the Mississippi and help Grant out a little bit. The problem is New Orleans had 2 forts with over 100 cannon and several warships defending it. So they give him a job, but it's an impossible job. They don't really expect him to succeed. They expect failure, but he's an old man. Just let him go. Let him give it a shot. Farragut is smarter than they give him credit for. He sits just outside of New Orleans for several days, maybe a week or 2, and bombards the forts, loosening them up. Then in the middle of the night, which is dangerous, orders his 17 ships to go past the forts that are blocking the mouth of the Mississippi. So actually, he kind of tricks them a little bit because the 2 forts are on the sides of the mouth of the Mississippi. It's a wide mouth of the Mississippi. And both sides expect that if Farragut makes this run, he's going to go right down the middle of the channel where it's deepest. Farragut orders his ships to follow him, which everyone likes a leader that will take the front, right? Because if the captain's going to go in the front, then it must be safe, or he must believe we're going to be able to survive this. And instead, he orders all of his ships over to the side of the bank next to one of the forts. So here's the fort up on a hill. Here's Farragut's men. The other fort is clear the heck over there. They don't have the range to fire on Farragut's ships. And the fort that's right directly above him can actually see, it's nighttime, but the moon is shining. They can actually see Farragut's ships going by. But the problem is because they're up on a hill, they can't point their cannons far enough down. So Farragut outsmarts him, gets past both forts, and captures the city of New Orleans. Boom. This guy that nobody had confidence in is all of a sudden a superhero. He'll play another big role later in the Civil War. In 1864, he captures Mobile Bay, the city of Mobile in Alabama. But there's a story that goes with that later on. Because he's got super courage and super bravery, which sometimes is necessary. It sometimes is stupid, but it's sometimes necessary. So by the time it's said and done, we go from having this guy that nobody trusts, nobody likes, nobody believes in because he's from Virginia. His brother vouches for him and gets him in, and as a result, he is given the rank of Admiral of the United States Navy. David Farragut is the first ever admiral in the United States Navy, and since Farragut, there have only been 272 other admirals. Today, I believe, and I might be wrong on this, you can Google it if you care, but you don't need to because it doesn't matter. I believe there are 6 admirals in the United States Navy. So that would be the equivalent of a 4-star general. There aren't very many of those. So David Farragut goes from being a guy nobody trusts to being the guy. He's the boss of the United States Navy. He is the highest ranking officer in the United States Navy. Even as an old man who was retired and came out of retirement because of his loyalty to his country, David Farragut is a stud. We see some other successes, but these are Southern successes in the East. So as Grant and Farragut have now captured almost all, not quite, we're getting close, almost all of the Mississippi River, back east, McClellan is floundering. He loses battles. The 7 days, anybody want to guess how long the 7 days battle lasted? Yeah, 7 days. In June of 1862, Lee attacks McClellan. 15,849 Union casualties, 20,000 Confederates, and McClellan retreats. Even though he kills or wounds or captures more Confederates, the Union loses. Another battle, August 1862, the Confederates win at the Second Manassas, or the Second Bull Run. McClellan can't win, even though he's got superior numbers. But this is early for me to say this. Every time from this point on that the Confederacy loses men, what do we know about the population of the Confederacy versus the population of the Union? It's much smaller. So when the Confederacy loses 20,000 men, can they replace them? Not very easily, especially as the war drags on. When the Union loses 16,000 men, can they replace them? Yes, because they've got 5 times as many people. So we could see that being an issue in Ukraine. Russia's population is quite a bit bigger. It's not huge, but it's quite a bit bigger than Ukraine. Ukraine, I think, 44 million people. Russia, about 120 million people. So there's 3 Russians for every Ukrainian. So when the Russians lose a soldier, they can replace them much easier than the Ukrainians can. That could be an issue if the war between Ukraine and Russia rolls on for very long. So McClellan, his hesitation causes him to lose battles until he's given an opportunity. Robert E. Lee decides to invade the Union. This is kind of weird because if you remember way back to the beginning, the plan, the strategy for the Union, for the Confederacy was defensive. It's not to invade, it's to defend your territory. But Lee, in late 1862, decides it's time to invade. He figures if he invades in 1862, when he's doing the winning, except out west on the Mississippi, it might force Abraham Lincoln into peace talks. Maybe Abraham Lincoln will just acknowledge that the Confederacy is separate. It's harvest season and the South needs supplies, so if they can go into the North and capture farm goods in the fall of 1862, he can supply the Confederate Army with good stuff, plunder northern farms. And the British and the French, they're kind of sitting around thinking, oh my gosh, the Confederacy might be able to win this. And if it looks like the Confederacy could potentially win this, what might the British and the French do? Join them, or at the very least, send ships and guns to support them, sort of like what the United States is doing with the Ukrainians. We're not fighting with them, but we're giving them stuff to help them fight. So leading up to this battle where Lee is going to invade the North, something happens that shouldn't have happened. There's a group of Union soldiers that are rummaging around an abandoned Confederate campsite. Now, any ideas why you would Union soldiers would rummage around so the Confederates had just left. In fact, there were still smoke from the fires smoldering. The Confederates aren't far away. What are you looking for? Maybe information. When the Confederates leave a campsite, they leave all their garbage just laying around. There aren't like trash cans. But they also sometimes leave stuff. It's sort of like if you clean up after a Husker football game with 90,000 people and you volunteer to clean out the stands. Do you think they find wallets and cell phones? Now, if you're good, you turn it in. But they're not turning stuff into the Confederate. They're looking for stuff. Maybe they'll find a little bit of tobacco, which is rare for the Union Army. They're just rummaging around looking for things that they need. Until one soldier looks on the ground and he bends down and he notices a scroll. He picks it up and he opens it, and out of the scroll falls 3 wonderfully delicious looking. What do you think he got there, big dog? No, they don't find 3 tubes of paper. What do they look like? Cigars. Oh boy, we found some cigars. Now, okay, think about this. If you're a lowly soldier in the Union Army and you just found some cigars, you have 2 choices. Smoke them with your friends because you probably like the tobacco, or if you want to get noticed, what would you do with them? Give them to your commander. That way, when there's a promotion, you're going to get it. But not only did they find 3 cigars, but the scroll that wrapped the cigars says, Confederate States of America, continue please. Oh my gosh, we found battle plans. Go.
Divide army and capture something.
You have to be able to speak cursive. Divide army and capture Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. That's in the north. Lee's going north. General Jackson to attack Harper's Ferry. That's in Virginia. Lee and Jackson to join General Longstreet and converge on Harrisburg. Signed, General Robert E. Lee, Army of Northern Virginia. These young Union soldiers, they're just nobodies. They're privates in the Union Army, discovered top secret, put them back in there please, top secret Confederate battle plans. What do you do with those? Give them to your commanding officer. What's your commanding officer do with them? Give them to their commanding officer, which gives them to the next guy, and eventually, who do they end up with? Not Lincoln, but right below Lincoln. Who's in charge of the Army of the Potomac? The guy that's been losing. McClellan. So now McClellan has these plans. All right, what I want you to do, let's see. You, 4, and Taylor. I want you to get in a group and listen to this before you set sail. And then the other 5 of you, so we have 5 and 5, 2 groups. What I want you to think about, McClellan has these plans. Remember the type of person that McClellan is and what his biggest weakness is. Don't say it out loud because you're going to say it in your group. You guys are George McClellan trying to decide what to do next. You've got a copy of Robert E. Lee's Confederate battle plan sitting in front of you. You guys, the other group of 5, you're going to get together, and you're Robert E. Lee. And you just found out that one of the 3 sets of battle plans that you wrote is missing, and you don't know where it is. What do you do now? If you're George McClellan, think about as if you're George McClellan, remembering his biggest weakness and what's going on in his mind, and you're Robert E. Lee, just finding out that that set of plans is missing and you don't know where it is. Get with your group and take about 2 minutes and discuss, what do you do with this knowledge? And why might your decision be a good decision? Why might your decision be a tragically horrible decision? Get with your group and talk about it. You guys are Robert E. Lee. You guys are George McClellan. I don't want you to smoke my cigars. If you're Robert E. Lee, what's going on in your mind? If you're George McClellan, what's going on in your mind? Think, think, think. Robert E. Lee's awful silent over here. You know your plan? So you guys are ready to respond when I ask you to respond. What's going on in your mind and what are you going to do? So you know what the potential pitfalls are of whatever your plan might be. Okay. How about you guys? Are you guys ready to respond? All right, you go back to your seats. Who should we start with, Robert E. Lee or George McClellan? We'll start with George McClellan. Okay. If you're George McClellan and you have top secret battle plans sitting in front of you that just happen to fall out of the sky into your lap, what's going on in your brain? Shelby?
Most likely waiting and trying to think, but very much hesitating to do anything at all.
What's the root of his hesitancy in this case, besides the fact that he's naturally a hesitator? Could this be a trap? It's awful convenient that those battle plans were just left laying at a campsite, almost like it was meant for us to find. Huh. So you've got a guy that's a natural hesitator who obviously now is thinking, what if it's a trap? You're exactly 100% right. Naturally hesitator, is this a trap? Let me come back to in a minute why he's so concerned about this being a trap, and we'll see if you can figure that out. Or Robert E. Lee, what are you thinking now that you know your battle plans are missing?
Well, that they're thinking, and they're probably gonna stay there for the night. We're gonna go back and kill them.
They're going to stay where for the night?
Like around that camp area.
Where you're going, or where they found the plans? Okay, here's the thing, maybe I didn't tell you. Lee doesn't know where those plans are or where they were lost. So does Lee know if McClellan even has those plans? He doesn't. That's where his decision has to come into play. If the Confederacy, if the Union doesn't have his plans, does he have a problem? If McClellan does have his plans, does he have a problem? Remember, he's invading the North in this instance. He's going into Pennsylvania, which means he's abandoning his supply lines. This is a big, big risk. Now, back to McClellan. If this is a trap, if McClellan decides to fall for the bait, if Lee left those plans laying there, and McClellan knows that Lee is like the slyest of all of the generals, if he knows that Lee left those plans there purposely for the Union soldiers to find, and the Union soldiers go here to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and McClellan moves his army all the way up here, what if it is a trap and he moves his entire Army of the Potomac here? What did he just leave wide open for an attack? The capital. So McClellan actually really has reason to worry about this. If it's a trap and he moves 60,000 soldiers away from defending Washington, D.C., he moves them out into the middle of Pennsylvania, and Lee hasn't really moved his men in that direction, all of a sudden Lee shows up on the doorstep of Washington and nobody's there to defend it. it is real and McClellan doesn't send his army to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, the battle actually is going to take place at a place called Sharpsburg. If he doesn't move his men there, what do the Confederates do to Harrisburg? They take it. This is not an easy decision. Lee's problem is, do they have my plans or not? What are the odds in hundreds of miles of forest and dozens of Confederate camps? What are the odds that the Union found this scroll with these plans? Can you see why both of these leaders have issues? Both of them are stuck. Lee now knows if McClellan has the plans and acts on them, his army likely will get crushed in the north. But he doesn't know if they have them. If they don't have the plans and he acts on them, he's probably going to win a great victory in the north. Ultimately, what decision do you suppose both men make? Lee decides there's no way they found my plans, so he continues. McClellan, the hesitator, actually decides the plans are legit, it's not a trap, and he sends his army to Harrisburg. So they both make the right decision, at least at the time, which is going to lead us into, again, the bloodiest single day of fighting in American history, which is yet to be eclipsed. There's not been a battle in American history, even still today, as bloody as the Battle of Antietam. September 17th, 1862, McClellan attacks in Sharpsburg, just outside of Pennsylvania, also called Antietam. Antietam is a creek, Sharpsburg is a place, where they fight with about 130,000 soldiers. It is the bloodiest day in American history. Neither side advanced, and 23,000 Union and Confederate soldiers are killed. 23,000 dead. That's not wounded, and the rules of warfare would suggest that for every man killed, there are 3 or 4 wounded, missing, or captured. So we're talking about maybe 100,000 men that are killed or wounded in the Battle of Antietam. This is a horrific day in American history. Now, at the end of the day at Antietam, Lee recognizes that he has lost. He cannot fight in the Union away from his supply lines and without reinforcements, so Lee is in retreat. But think about this. August 17th, you're a Confederate. You've just seen your friends killed. You've seen death and massacre. You're exhausted. It's September. It's probably hot. I don't know what the temperature is. You're exhausted. You're told to retreat. How fast is your retreat? After a defeat, everyone's kind of like, the next morning, so September 18th, 1862, McClellan has a really tough decision to make. Chase them, potentially finishing Lee's army off, or he looks around his camp and he sees that his men are also struggling. His men are exhausted, and his men have seen things and done things the day before that no one should ever be asked to do. So McClellan, being a man of the men, instead of chasing Lee, potentially finishing his army off, decides to rest. He wins the Battle of Antietam, but he misses an opportunity. How many of you have ever played Wii boxing? Really, Kylie? Really, Ari? You've never played Wii boxing? You guys got to get with the program. Okay, in Wii boxing, if I'm boxing against Taylor, by the way, it's a workout, right? Your arms are like, oh. Anyway, I'm boxing against Taylor, and I've punched her so many times. What does she start to do when she's almost ready to go down in Wii boxing? Starts to wobble, right? What happens? What should I do if I've got my opponent wobbling like this? Keep punching, because she's almost ready to go down. But if I'm like, oh, she's almost knocked out, I think I'll put my Wiimotes down and go get a sandwich. By the time I come back, what's happened to her wobble? She's straightened back up, and her little power level is coming back up because I'm not hitting her anymore. That's what's just happened. He had Lee wobbling. If he would have chased him, he maybe destroys the Army of Northern Virginia, and in late 1862, potentially ends the war. Lincoln is ticked. It's a failure for the Union Army, even though it's a victory for the Union Army. McClellan will be replaced. Now, I'm going to stop the recording because I want to show this video on Antietam. How much time do we have? I know it's a short day. 4 minutes is all. So I'll stop the recording, those of you watching. We'll finish up Antietam next time we meet. We will take the essay portion of the test on Tuesday. It probably will be in Otis if you look right now.